Hello. We're trying this again. Apparently, the first time I did the live, there was no sound, and people were very nice and didn't yell at me. But I'm going to start fresh so that I can just delete that crappy live once we're done and you guys can watch this one. Because then, if people coming later to watch, then we won't have the problem. So, hopefully, people will find this live stream again. I am always crooked. So this weekend, I was at the COSI Collaborative Science Conference, which is a conference that Dave Feldman puts on. And Dave and his wife, Sharon, are amazing, and they put on a really great conference. So I'm glad to be here with you guys again. Hopefully people will find the live stream now that I'm not just talking and no one was able to hear me. So that was fun. Hopefully people will come and rejoin this live stream. So hopefully we're good there. Hey, Fahad, it's nice to see you. Glad that you're joining. Thank you for giving me the heads up. I was just flapping my gums. No one could hear anything. And I know I'm pretty, but I'm not that pretty, really. I know that. So, all right. So what was I talking about? I was talking about that I'm here in Las Vegas, going home tomorrow. I stayed here to get some work done because I usually find right after a conference, I get like creative and I want to get a lot of work done. So I do that. But I damaged my favorite leather jacket. I've had this leather jacket forever. I probably actually need to get it taken in. It's a little big, but it's a beautiful color. Isn't it a beautiful color? And when I was at Fogo de Chao, I was splattered with butter. This is a Fogo de Chao kind of problem that might happen to you. It was just an explosion of butter. There was some butter in a warmer. It exploded. And not like all of it, but a big bubble popped up out of it and butter all over. So that's going to need some dry cleaning. Anyway, so that happened while I was at the COSI conference, but it was the only injury that was suffered at COSI. So that was good to know. I had a great weekend, saw a lot of great people talk. I met Nick Norwitz, who I hadn't actually met in person before. He's funny. Heard talks from Brett Shear, David Diamond, Nadir Ali, Amber O'Hearn, a bunch of great people like that, and really enjoyed the experience. I'm the oddball at the COSI conference because I'm not a lean mass hyperresponder. I'm not actually a hyperresponder in any way, shape, or form. Well, I mean, at least in a cholesterol sense. I can hyper respond in other ways. But but it's always really interesting to hear the theories and the issues. And I learn a lot about management of high, essentially. And I watched not the premiere, but an early screening of Cholesterol Code, which was a documentary that Dave is doing about the lean mass hyperresponder study. And so got a lot of great kind of information and insight and learned about, if you're a low carb supporting cardiologist like Brett Shear, how do you manage somebody who either does or doesn't have high LDL or does or doesn't have a high CAC score? So how that CAC is being used to sort of watch. So, here's the thing, right? You all know, right, that LDL is not heart disease. It's considered a risk factor, but just having high LDL is not heart disease. Heart disease is that there is plaque in your arteries. And so a CAC test, which is an imaging test, like a artery x-ray, is to not be technically correct, but that, essentially is a way you can actually see if there is heart disease. And so that is interesting. And then how do you manage that? Because let's say your average person who is a lean mass hyperresponder, they have high LDL, they don't have any plaque though. When you go and you look at a CAC, what is the protocol there? They don't really need management because there's no apparent heart disease going on, right? But then there are occasionally people who come in who are on a ketogenic diet, are feeling great, but they have a family history of heart disease. Something else is clearly going on in the process, and they do have arterial plaque. how do you deal with that? How do you manage that? How do you move forward? And, different doctors are going to have different perspectives on that. But, from Brett Shear's perspective, there are specific types of drugs that he may use to work with this person so that they can continue to hopefully regress or halt the growth of some of that plaque. And, I also learned really interesting things about, different types of drugs that are out there in terms of cholesterol management and why some of them are a little scarier than others. Ones that I'm a little concerned about family members that are on, things like that. But like not being like, it's not saying the doctors here were anti appropriate use of interventional cardiology, but we're not aggressive about it. Anyway, learned a lot and enjoyed my time. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or things they want me to discuss today? I have had some fabulous steaks while I've been here, some bunless burgers, that kind of thing. And yeah. So currently the sun is about to set, getting into that dusk time of evening, so it's nice. Fahad would like to hear my views on OMAD. Okay, so OMAD stands for 1 meal a day, and some people, they adore the OMAD, and I myself am not a huge fan of OMAD personally. I am a huge fan of anything that works for a person, just generally speaking. So if someone came to me and said, I love OMAD, my hunger is well managed, I feel great, I feel really energetic, I love the life I get to live on OMAD, I'm not going to be the one that's going to say, well, it's terrible and you're killing yourself. I'm going to be like, hey, well, that's great. Let's look at that. Let's take that into account. Because if somebody loves doing something and it's not harming them, that's something we should keep doing. In a neutral human, does OMAD have a few more challenges than not OMAD, than like TOMAD, two meals a day or even 3? I think that OMAD can have a bit more challenge in a few ways. One of which is I do like to give most people, if they're looking to either gain muscle mass, right, or retain it at a time when maybe it's a little more challenging for them, when they're maybe, if they're a woman, they're postmenopausal, or if they're a little less active right now or things like that. I think giving the body at least 2 feedings of protein has a slight leg up. But I do think that 1 meal can absolutely be sufficient. And there are people that gain muscle on 1 meal a day for sure. I think that some people digestively struggle a little bit more. So if you're somebody that has digestive issues, spreading the food out can be of benefit, because 1 big meal can lead to some more digestive issues. If you have absorption issues, giving yourself 2 meals or 3 meals can be more beneficial to absorb those nutrients as you go. And I do think that for people with a history of eating disorders, especially binge eating disorder, this is going to be maybe controversial to say, but I do see some people who have a history of enjoying binging, liking OMAD. And I'm not saying this is everybody, not at all, but there are some people who use the OMAD as a way to restrict all day, so they get this like party atmosphere for their 1 meal, and they can recreate that sort of binge experience that is part of their history of an eating disorder. Again, I want to reiterate, that's not to say that everyone who likes OMAD has an eating disorder. However, if you have an eating disorder, you might not want to do that, because one of the things we want to move away from is that sort of binge mindset. Again, it's all contextual though. So that would mean for me, just because it's 1 meal doesn't mean it's a binge, but it's a little more likely to fit into somebody who's bingy, if that makes sense. So that is one of the things I see in the low carb, I'm really using my hands today. Sorry, guys. In the low carb and keto community is that it really is a opportunity. Changing the way that you eat is a great opportunity for a lot of people to have some healing from eating disorders that they maybe experienced in their past, but you have to move through the mindset of the eating disorder and come out the other side. It just doesn't automatically heal you. I think it gives you a good opportunity and a place, but if you don't keep doing that work and moving towards a healing or a healed sort of mentality, then you can sort of get partway there. I think the change of food can make things easier to do that work. I don't think it automatically does the work for everybody. And so there might still be emotional and mental work to do within this new milieu of a low carb or keto or carnivore experience. But I certainly see people carnivore, ketovore, low carb who still are experiencing the mindset of the mental, disorder around eating. And so you have to, don't stop halfway. It's kind of where I'm saying. Helene says, do I feel like 3 meals works better for hormone balancing? By the way, sorry if I'm like shaking. I'm sitting on a stool and it's making me want to like rock a little bit. Anyway. I think, yes. I think that I'm a fan of 3 meals, but I'm okay with 2. Less a fan of 1, but it's still on my okay list in certain circumstances, right? The reason I like 3 meals usually is in a lot of clients, in a lot of people, what I say is that what I see, not what I say it too, but I see it. What I see is a lot of people skipping breakfast and having like a big lunch and a big dinner. And so they often, when I see clients in this cycle where they're struggling with overeating, when I add in breakfast, they don't struggle with overeating, even though we reduce the size of their dinner and their lunch. It's not like, of course, you'd be like, well, you're giving them an extra meal. Maybe that's why they're not struggling, because you're allowing them to overeat. No, I'm saying even if we take the same amount of food and we split it over 3, I find that I call it getting ahead of the hunger. So maybe you're not starving yet in the morning. I don't want you to feel like nauseated at the thought of eating, but in the morning, maybe you're like, I could eat, but you're not starving yet. And you have a bit of breakfast, you have a meal. It doesn't have to be a huge meal, but you have a meal. Then when we get to lunch, you're not as hungry because you've already had some food. And then by dinner. So one thing I see a lot of people do that tends to not work out so good is they wait until they're really, really hungry to eat. And then when you do that, you have already kind of screwed yourself over in terms of satiety signaling, because of how slowly satiety takes to kind of set in, or I should say satiation. They're different. So the experience of you're eating and you reach a point where you're like, I don't feel like eating anymore. That's satiation. And so you want that experience when you're finishing up your meal. Oftentimes I find when people are pushing that first meal later in the day, they often have to eat more before they reach that satiation point. Now, if you're somebody that instead tells me, hey, I eat breakfast and lunch, but then I get to dinner and I'm just not hungry, I tend to believe that. And I'm like, great. So if somebody's going to be 2 meals for me, usually I rather them eat kind of when it's light out, right? So like breakfast, even if it doesn't have to be an early breakfast, but like breakfast lunch or breakfast late lunch or breakfast early dinner, then lunch dinner, if that makes sense. Because that gives you the option, right? You have like breakfast, lunch, and if at 6 o'clock you're like, oh, I'm hungry, having a light meal. And if you're not, you can skip that. Whereas when you skip that first meal, I find it more often leads to disaster. But again, what is working for you is appropriate. So that is not to say, hey, I've been doing breakfast and dinner for 7 years and it's going great and my life works perfectly. Who am I to say you're wrong? But I'm saying when I see people not having the experience they want, these are the changes that often make them have more of the experience they want. Okay. So Helene, in terms of the hormones I'm talking about balancing, though, I'm specifically talking about like satiety hormones. Do I think you need 3 meals a day to balance like estrogen and progesterone and that kind of thing? I don't have evidence for or against that, to be honest, but that's not the hormones I'm talking about at better balancing are like the hunger and satiety hormones, which do have an impact on all the rest of the hormones. All the hormones, they talk to each other. All right. Maria says, do I take any protein supplements? Sorry, I'm squinty because I don't have my glasses on. Do I take any protein supplements? I started taking whey and it find that it bloated me, but it was pretty pricey. So I'm going to finish it. I'm looking for ideas, mostly keto carnivore-ish. Okay. So protein supplements. I would define a protein supplement as not whole food way to get more protein in your diet. And generally speaking, those are going to be powders, right? Protein powders. Whey is one of the most popular ones. There's also casein. There's casein and whey combinations. There's also beef protein isolate, collagen, vegan proteins exist, like hemp seed protein, that kind of thing. And so those are all forms of protein supplements, right? And so do I support? I do support them if you need them, but in my opinion, they're always slightly less good than whole foods. So, egg white protein. That's another one. It's dried egg whites. So generally speaking, I think women need a minimum of 90 grams of protein in a day, even if they're small, and working up from there. And so if you're struggling to get that much protein in a day, you did your best, you just can't eat that much, that's when I would say it might be worthwhile to add in a protein supplement. But they do, as you mentioned, especially whey, can often give people digestive upset. Bloating is a thing that gets discussed a lot. Some people say that like the beef protein isolate causes less that bloating experience. Or sometimes people are different with casein versus whey. But if you experience digestive issues, it might not be the protein source. It might also be things that are in it, right? Because there's usually has to be a sweetener or some other flavorings. Vegas is very dry and my throat dries out. Okay. So, if you're experiencing digestive upset, I would probably say, hey, let's try and get the protein you need in your diet in meal form, right? So that would be doing something like eggs and chicken sausage for breakfast and having I'm just telling this is how I eat. You can eat however you want, but like it's just giving you examples. Maybe like a salad with a bunch of meat in it at lunchtime, and when you go to dinner, make big steak or a pork chop or something like that. So you're getting at least 30 grams of protein in at each meal, and that pretty much is covering the protein, plus a little more if you're bigger. That's going to cover a lot of protein needs. And maybe you don't actually need to go to a supplement. You're just going to make sure you bump up the protein in your meals. Egg whites are a fabulous way to get more protein in. I have nothing against egg yolks. I want to make that perfectly clear. But you can eat a lot of egg whites and they don't really fill you up the way that a whole egg will. And so you can like if you're making a big scramble, buy one of the little cartons of egg whites. Then you don't feel bad about wasting the yolks and throwing them away because that feels bad. You just pour some extra egg white in there. You can add an extra 10 grams here, 10 grams there, and so those are ways that you can do that. Helene says, I feel like it's the only way I can get 100 grams of protein for the day. I think she means by eating 3 meals a day. That's another reason to spread them out if you get too full in each meal. I'll come back to Tracy. Fahad said, I started taking whey protein last year with weightlifting, started losing hair. Yeah, I don't personally think that whey protein is usually in a hair loss issue. I understand what you're saying about DHT. It's not something I usually hear. But again, I'm not a protein powder expert. Um, So usually, for people that I hear that want to suppress DHT, that's usually a supplement or a medication that's going to keep that suppressed. So that would be something you would add to your routine. There are several hormonal related companies you can work with that will help you customize your hormone experience. But there are DHT suppressing supplements and drugs. I think one of them is, I am not a doctor, and this is not medical advice. If I remember correctly, spironolactone is one of them, if I remember correctly. Anyway, I could be backwards on that. So I would check in, who has great information on hair loss, hair growth, hair systems, all that kind of stuff is Derek at more date. I was gonna say this backwards. More dates, more plates. Is that it? It's dates and plates. And he's got a great YouTube channel, and he has taught. I think it's more dates, more plates. You wouldn't want less plates or less dates, right? So I think it's more plates, more dates. Plates as in weightlifting plates, not like eating plates, but spelled the same. And so I would look to him for information on that, because he has extensively talked about hair loss, weightlifting, and drugs. Sorry. Tracy says, have I tried Miracle Noodles? I have tried Miracle Noodles. I have tried Miracle Noodles for many years. So Miracle Noodles are konjac noodles, also known as glucomannan noodles. They are a yam root, so they're almost all fiber. The type of fiber is not really digested, and which means you don't want to eat multiple packs at the same time, or that will get scary. And you want to make sure you're well hydrated so that you can start to digest these things. I actually would not recommend konjac or glucomannan noodles unless you talk to your doctor about it, but I do not think they feel compatible with people that have very slow digestion or something like gastroparesis, because they take work for your system to digest them because they're not digestible. But most people seem to do fine. And I am pro konjac noodle. Miracle Noodle is not my favorite brand. They're great, but there's a brand I prefer called It's Skinny Noodle. It's a terrible name. I don't like the name. It's called It's Skinny Noodle, and they make a bunch of different konjac noodles, and the texture of those I prefer. Now they have a little bit of oat fiber in them. And so that, I think, is what makes me like the texture more. I don't have a problem with it, but if you have a problem with that from an ingredient perspective, then Miracle Noodles is the way to go. I think they're just pure konjac, and they don't have any other additives. But for me, I enjoy the It's Skinny Noodle a lot more. They make a bunch of different ones. They make the spaghetti, that's my favorite one. They make the fettuccine. They make a little orzo one. So I just order those from Amazon. They're my favorite brand, but any of those konjac noodles are going to be pretty good. Oh, Tracy, they do have, so Miracle Noodles does have egg white noodles. They're newer to market with that. So Miracle Noodles started by making konjac noodles. Now they also make egg white noodles, but make sure that you are ordering the egg white noodles if you want the egg white noodles. But the primary product of Miracle, if you just tell people Miracle Noodles, they're going to think konjac, because that's the majority of the products they make, or at least they used to make. But they do have a newer product that is egg white noodles. So you would want to make sure to say Miracle Noodles, egg white noodles, so that people know. And I have tried those as well. I like them. I don't love them. They're a good way to bump up the protein a little bit in a meal, which is helpful. They don't have a strong flavor, but they kind of clump together. They don't have sort of the body or the chew that I'm looking for. And so I prefer the It's Skinny konjac noodles to the egg white Miracle Noodles. But from a nutritional perspective, I think the egg white noodles are super duper. Totally think they're a great idea. Totally pro the egg white noodles. But yeah, but I didn't know that's what you meant. But yeah, I got an order of those a couple months ago and I used them. And I have to say that the next order I placed was definitely back to my regular konjac noodles rather than the egg white noodles again. But if you're a carnivore, right, if you're somebody that likes to stay away from almost all ingredients that aren't animal based, then those egg white noodles are going to be right up your alley. You know, mix them with a maybe like a Alfredo-ish based sauce, and you have a great carnivore option for sure. So I thought they were good. They weren't, 100% my cup of tea. Hopefully that answers your question. All right. Any last questions before we move on with our evening, everyone? All right, that might be it then. Thank you for joining me. I'm sorry about our earlier technical issues, and I will be back next Tuesday with another live from California instead of from Las Vegas this time. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon.